Okay, modern example. It's a company called Goldcorp. It's a public company, which I like to talk about a lot because we get customers in occasionally that say, well, I'm public, I can't crowdsource. Everything has to be proprietary. I can't possibly give away my secrets. They're a Toronto mining firm, about 50 years old. They had a little problem. They were running out of gold. They had thought they had mined out everything that they had. So their CEO went to MIT, and he attended a session on crowdsourcing. Back then, the term didn't exist, but it was called something different. And he came back with the idea that he was going to come up with a prize, much like the Longitude Prize. And he offered $575,000 to anyone who could find him more gold. And he did something much more important. He gave away all the company records on the mineralogical reserves in their area. And that's critical to crowdsourcing. You have to give up something in order to be respected. And that's where a lot of people have trouble. And a lot of the employees at Goldcorp had big trouble with this, and many of them left, and they accused him of destroying the company. But the results were that out of 1,200 people stepped forward to take the Goldcorp challenge. They identified 110 new sites within their current area. 80% of them produced gold, and their market value went from 100 million to 9 billion very quickly. And if just the big deal here is another big part of crowdsourcing is it's all about the amateur. It's about having a fresh perspective. The people that won this contest were a company called Fractal Graphics, and they are a video production company out of Australia. They have nothing to do with mining. But what they do well is visualize data. And the end story here is that the people in Goldcorp were looking at Excel-style flat sheets of paper. And when the people in Australia got a hold of the data, they turned it into 3D. And in doing so, they had a much more effective way of finding gold. And the results are. Okay. Okay. Let's briefly talk about the economic model. And many of you are going to want to know, well, how do I plug this in to my company? And what I do here is just briefly contrast the differences, the major differences in economics and the way business is run from traditional to crowdsourced. So I have my silo over on the left, and the traditional characteristics are products are developed in-house. The not invented here syndrome is alive and well. Success is really the ability to lock out your competition. Service is an expense against sales. I don't know if you've ever heard it before, but I wish phone calls cost us $8 each. I wish the customers were calling. Vendor involvement is minimal, and innovation is not a responsibility of every employee. It's a privilege of the few. We have a little challenge tonight in that our cord isn't long enough to run it. So let's look at the crowdsourced version of the new company. And this could be a Lego or a Google. The first step is to create a market. So in Google's case, they created a better browser, and then on top of search engine. And on top of that, they started giving away lots of really cool applications, like maps, and you can build a website there. And Lego did very much the same thing. They had a nice piece of software that ran their robotics, and they decided to simply give it away. And then comes open source. So not only do you give it away, you open up the code so that your customers can go in there and mess around with the program. And they'll work together and share ideas and make the code better, faster than your company with your limited staff ever could. And the difference in the model here is that we have an onion versus a silo. And then the outer layer of the onion is the general public. And one of the things you'll learn about crowdsourcing is you manage for abundance, not for scarcity. So Apple manages to keep as few iPods in circulation as it can to keep the price up. Google manages for abundance. They want as many people to hit their site as they possibly can. Lego wants as many people to use its products as it can, to manipulate its software. It's a very different look on the world. They depend on the prosumer, the person that's going to go in there and change the code to modify their objects and their products, and they don't mind it. And they look at their vendors as partners, not as adversaries to be kept in the dark. In the case of Boeing, Boeing has turned design of its aircraft really over to its vendors and said, you know, in the old days, we used to just give you a spec and punish you if you didn't need it. Now, we're going to work with you to develop better components for your airplanes. And then your employees, really, in most crowdsourced companies, the employee base is a meritocracy that is run, the more ideas you have and the more traction those ideas have, the better chance you have of being in upper management. And at the center of all this is management, and what they're doing, largely in a crowdsourced company, is facilitating all this and nurturing the crowd and the community that's built up around that company. The biggie here is that you give away your core product in many cases, and you make money off servicing. And the big deal there is that you get closer to your customer in the process. And you don't have the burden of perfecting your widget. You can get closer to the customer. Okay. Just closing up, the opportunities abound for all of us in crowdsourcing. In companies, you can use your constituents as a way of improving your product development and leveraging collective wisdom of your employees as well. Professional service firms are all around us that do this. Microengagement is one. Another big company called Gearson Lehman in New York really runs its business off a crowd and the collective wisdom of senior executives that are drawn into consulting assignments. In individual practitioners, the flip side of that is there's a lot more of these networks available where you can join and actually make money on the side by helping out other companies. As part of my research in creating microengagement, I was actually hired by the company who I was employed by to do consulting through a company called Primary Global. And I didn't know it until the second I picked up the phone, and you get $300 for a half an hour. And sure enough, the other guy on the other end of the phone was hired Primary Global to look for information that already existed within the company. And we had a good laugh, but it taught me a lot about how companies value their employees. So here, I just want to do one contrasting image of what we have today. And in terms of effort versus return, looking at internal R&D, companies that have Web 2.0, the conversation between customers and the business already set up, and structured crowdsourcing or constituent-driven innovation, as we like to call it. What are the differences and what are the performance differences? So we have internal R&D, and this is effort. This isn't headcount or anything like that. So you have a traditional company with a large internal R&D staff and a crowdsourcing company with a little bit less effort going into traditional, more effort into the nurturing of the crowd. They may or may not have implemented a Web 2.0 strategy, meaning they're actually having a conversation or at least hosting one. Most companies host a conversation and then fail to do anything with the data. And that's what we're talking about here today, is actualizing the data, involving the customers and making promises and delivering on them in terms of product development. In terms of structured CDI, you might be running contests. You might be doing Idea Agora, which essentially is, purchasing ideas for products, much like Procter & Gamble does from your constituent base. And you also might be running a prediction market within your company to try to identify where the next big idea is going to come from. You'd be surprised how much knowledge is locked up in that org chart. And prediction markets help set that knowledge free. So the idea here is that in our experience, you get about a 30% lift in sales, both in our research on the outside and our first-hand knowledge. Right off the bat, there's an easy 30% hanging there. And I think a lot of companies would kill for that 30%, especially now. And the good news is it's not really expensive. This is something that can be done very cheap.